What's poppin', what's cracking, what's going on, what's up? I want to talk about people calling things bias just because someone disagrees with you. Um, it's talking about bias is really weird. I've always had some issues dealing with it, especially, mostly going up talking with my family, trying to use data or statistics to like come to a conclusion instead of just, whatever I feel like. And that's kind of led my direction of what I think about it now going online. The most annoying way of looking at it recently, or the most annoying way that I've dealt with it, is when anybody talks about a controversial figure who does something, well, controversial, but sometimes they'll do something that's controversial, but that's objectively is a, well, it's objectively is a bad decision given the context of what they're expected to do. Like Elon Musk, for example, like Jordan Peterson, like Andrew Tate, like Hassan, like I watched Destiny a bit. Destiny be saying some wild shit. This nigga should have known better. But that's the guy I watched the most out of all of them. Who else? It's run of the mill for like presidents or whatnot. Like I don't expect old people to be able to parse through their biases at all. So when it comes to like Trump or Biden, I'm like, yeah, people are gonna hate him regardless. When it comes to young people who are talking about internet figures, it's anytime someone is accurately critiquing a bad action they have, there is a drove of people coping. They're just coping. They're just saying like, you just don't like him, so you don't like anything that they do. And I'm like, for one, you can just not like someone and accurately critique something that they've done. When watching TLDR News, they're like a European, I think they're just British, but a European news channel. They're just like, why do you say these things about Elon Musk? You guys just don't like him. They literally just report the things that he have done and the immediate consequence of the thing that he has done. That's all they say. Or they'll talk about Destiny, who's critical of Elon Musk. Specifically now with Twitter. Like, he has not been critical of a pre-Twitter Elon Musk, as most people weren't. Like, I wasn't critical of a pre-Twitter Elon Musk. I mean, do I think he makes bad business decisions at times? Yeah, possibly. I think probably a bunch of people do. I've never run a business. I can't talk to that. But it wasn't, we weren't all watching it. Here's the thing. Often have been critical of Jordan Peterson, and people just be like, you just hate him for some reason. I'm like, I don't have a reason to just hate people who try to do something. In his brand, he's doing something noble, he thinks. He at least claims to be trying to speak to an unspoken for group of individuals. But I'll mention the whole lobster thing and the hierarchy thing and whatnot. Like, he's misquoting science or inaccurately understanding science often and driving conclusions based on this bad interpretation of science. Like, the science that he's reading is good, but his understanding of it was flawed, and the conclusion that he's preaching as a result of it is also flawed. I mean, there were statements he said about same-sex relationships where he just horribly misquoted or horribly misinterpreted data about single parent relationships and extrapolated that onto same-sex relationships. I mean, there's so many instances of just bad actions, and I don't even really need to do Andrew Tate for most people who are to watch here, because after I've said the things that I've said, anybody that's a fan of Andrew Tate is damn sure not going to listen to anything I'm going to say now after I've already critiqued people lightly critiqued people that lean further to the right. Now look, talking about bias, I'm a lefty, right? Politically and socially, I'm a lefty. Am I going around forcing vegan food down people's throat? No. Am I drop kicking people who don't use the preferred pronouns of my friends? No, because you're fucking grown adult. You can do whatever you want. Like, if I think something you're doing is kind of dickish, I'm like, whatever. People are assholes sometimes. I don't really give a shit. But at the same time, that doesn't mean just because I prefer not to be unbiased doesn't mean I have to. No, if Andrew Tate makes some statement about a lifestyle that he seems to speak about remote, that he doesn't even actually live, right? Talking about hedonism, Andrew Tate talking about hedonism while constantly doing his imagery is that of someone who's in front of a bunch of sport cars, a bunch of women that he's not married to, not being a family man, not raising children. He's if it's true that he's money laundering, I don't even really know. It's like there's a bunch of things that his actions are doing while speaking about a lifestyle, which is interesting because I'll talk to an Andrew Tate fan and they'll be like, he thinks these aspects of a lifestyle are important and good, and like that's the stuff that he preaches. I'm like, it's interesting, but he's hooking you in with these things that aren't the same. And she's like, well, that's just good business thinking. That's just, it's like, I suppose that's an argument. But when someone does similar actions on the other side, some of these same people aren't as willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. Now, one thing that I often say to people, as someone who's critical of Jordan Peterson, I'll be like, look, there's a lot of useful shit that even Andrew Tate will say. People look at me like, my friends are on the left, will be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, they get at me almost the way that they get at y'all. Because of bias, right? They're unwilling to concede the fact that perhaps Andrew Tate is giving you useful information at times, and at other times giving you bad information or being a bad influence, not even based on the information that he's giving. He might just be describing his own life and in ways that he is kind of allowed to be a piece of shit in his own life by your description. But in a lot of ways, a lot of the things are his own person. He's not even giving some of the advice. He doesn't even often tell people to do the things that he does. I mean, he's talks about how empty he is. Like, I'm like, literally defending someone like Andrew Tate to people who are also on the left of me because I'm like, look, the way that you're critiquing him is bad. Like, that's bias. I don't like biased critiques. But like, for the same critiques, I'm like, here, the way that I critique Andrew Tate's the same way that I critique Jordan Peterson. Is the information that he's giving true? Is it harmful? Is it bad? Is it like, it's stuff like that. But like, it's interesting because I'll critique JP and I'll also critique Andrew Tate. But the thing is, I don't really have to because most people already know the things that are wrong with Andrew Tate, but they add extra. But most people don't actually know all the things that are wrong with Jordan Peterson. Or they'll be like, well, I've heard people call him racist, and I don't think there's any evidence for that, though. That's one thing. I have heard him. I mean, he's made some he may have made some questionable statements about low-income communities and culture or whatnot, but it's really hard to argue that those are being racist or just stating some observations about black communities or whatnot. There's a better argument for calling Ben Shapiro racist. I fucking hate Ben Shapiro, by the way. I don't really talk about him ever, and I never will because he's pretty obviously just a grifter. I mean, it's like when we talk about bias, we'll talk about bias with Ben Shapiro. In one instance, Kanye on the Tucker Carlson show. I mean, he was saying things about not necessarily, basically, how he was being pushed or manipulated to vote Democrat by Kim Kardashian, or how the people in the media were upset with him wherever he went outside of the status quo. Things that obviously Republicans are big fans of, obviously Ben Shapiro. And they cut out from the interview when he talked about the fact that Kanye is vaccinated. And he talked about the fact that he talked about some opinions he had about Jews that was cut out of the interview. But to that point, when he saw that Tucker Carlson interview, Ben Shapiro was saying, this guy looks really sane, more sane than people in most of people in regular life. It was a really wide and broad statement. Like most of Ben Shapiro's friends don't, Like, it's a weird statement to assume that most people are aggressive lefties. Like, but whatever. The point is, big fan, saying this guy's mentally stable. He sounds sane. He sounds mentally stable when he's saying some opinions, using the same logic to get there. He's saying opinions that he likes. He's still using weird conspiratorial logic to argue that his family's trying to make him a Democrat, making these ways. But then he uses that same conspiratorial logic to say that he loves Hitler. And then it's like, well, this is clearly a mentally unstable person. He's always been a mentally unstable person. It's like, but no, Ben, you said that he sounds sane. You actually gave us a reason, like, well, maybe we should listen to the Kanye. You said he sounds sane. Like, that's your right-wing leader being biased. Not your right-wing leader, but to those who do watch him and take it. People take him incredibly. It's really annoying. It's just critique of positions that are unlike. I mean, Tim Pool and Ben Shapiro not agreeing with Kanye's take on Jewish people in media. They were calling them sellouts, or saying that they were. I mean, like, I don't like Tim Pool or Ben Shapiro. You can take a guess. Most right-wing grifters, well, most people that are called right-wing grifters, I probably don't like. Not necessarily even hate. I just don't watch their content. But I don't, I mean, the language that Tim Pool is using, referring to, saying like, hey, well, maybe we can't say that Jews as a people are a problem. Like, that statement was being looked at. He's being unwilling to accept truthful information. Like that, like just not being racist, not being willing to accept a racist conclusion without sufficient evidence. Now, if your opinion is sufficient evidence is Jews are really successful, I'm like, it's weird. It's weird, the bias thing. Again, a lot of it's the right to left stuff. And on the left, I'm going to be seeing a lot of, even when my critiques of some, bias issues on the right are like more I don't want to call not being racist a left-leaning stance, because that's insane, right? Like, most people, if asked, would say they're not racist. But it does seem like, at the very least, lefties are more concerned with not being racist, and they're more willing to sacrifice other things to not be racist. Like, you know what I mean, right? Like, they'll grift to not being racist. That's the easiest way for people on the right to understand that. Like virtue signaling, grifting is a major thing. So I always like to joke around all of my, especially my white friends or other friends, about like race-related things to make them uncomfortable, and being like, maybe it's not that big a deal. Like, most people probably don't. But here's at the halfway point where I'm like switching topics a little bit. Most people probably don't hold harsh or biased opinions, but most people don't hold strong opinions about a lot of specific details. And when given any information about some specific details, it might actually strengthen a harsher opinion that they could have. And that might sound like a nothing burger of a sentence, so maybe just try and work through some example. I mean, damn, do I want to go to something really freaking harsh? Let's start with something more simple first. Like, I always start with race-related stuff. It's just easy to understand, though. Let's do Ukraine. Let's do Ukraine. I feel like most people don't have most people might have some serious stance on Ukraine without knowing many details at all. Most people are like, oh, there's a war happening in Europe. Like, what, Russia? I hate Russia. Russia's bad guys. They can't do that. Stop, right? But that's where it usually stops for like the justification for the logic. Then other details from outside sources really come in and do a lot of the extra work for most people who aren't just going to research on their own. And some people will research on their own and a new problem comes up. So you find out, or you'll find out, you hear maybe everyone said you hear the talking point. Well, remember, during the stages of the USSR, Ukraine was part of Russia, and Russia's argument that, for one, we are like trying to reestablish our original ground, and that Ukrainian culture is kind of just Russian culture, an offshoot of it. Their argument for that, right? Though if you go even further back, they're still a separate people, but let's not even worry about that right now. The fact that they're a separatist in the Donbass, and in Crimea, there were separatists apparently. Like, there are people that wanted to be a part of Russia in there. It's like, oh, okay, well, these people, look, what, do these people's right to want to be part of Russia not have any value if other people want to be part of Ukraine? Like, whose value is more important there? Maybe you listen to the genocide, the Russian genocide. You find out that the Azov Battalion are actually pretty fucking xenophobic. Like, they're real bad actors. They're real pieces of shit that actually are in the Ukraine, especially in the areas that that Russia was going to originally talk about. Like, when you hear just those statements, and then maybe you listen to more right-leaning news about it, I'm like, well, why is the U.S. so concerned with her? You're like, well, it's interesting that, like, for one, if you're hearing all of those things and you're on the right side, then you see how aggressively supportive our Democratic representatives are for anything in the Ukrainian conflict. I mean, you're going to hear, like, oh, it's weird that they're doing this, they're wasting all this money. Like, you get a negative energy about it because a bunch of money is going in there. It's almost like that, less favorite child thing. Like, your parents are nice to one kid, and it's like, well, hey, why aren't you giving these things for me? It's like, now not only do I hate my parents for being mean to me, I hate this kid for getting all this shit that I'm not getting. It's kind of that. I'm like, why are we sending a bunch of fucking money over and a bunch of resources over when we're struggling, when we're just coming through an economic crisis of sorts or whatnot, right? And why are we doing all these things? And like, also hard to just that argument. Like, what we care about, democracy and freedom. We just left Afghanistan, right? Right, was Afghanistan, right? The U.S. has been in so many Middle Eastern countries that sometimes I forget which ones are the ones we're talking about. I know it's not really funny, but it's a sad, funny thing. I'm like, sometimes I confuse which countries we're being referring to. But we just left Middle Eastern conflicts who immediately lost their democracy as soon as we left. I'm like, is it really about that? Like, that I'm a lefty who thinks we should be helping in the right, and I still know and have all of those facts and information. Like, with just those facts, I could reasonably see someone being like, what the fuck are we doing over there? Like, if you think, like, if you think we should be going over there, maybe you just dogmatically listen to your left-wing overlords. Like, I could honestly see someone saying that. Like, I could get it. Now, could I honestly see someone saying that because I watch people debate about Ukrainian, the morality of interfering in Ukraine, and I've just heard those talking points spouted over and over again, even though they refuted pretty reasonably? Yes, maybe. If you're on the left and you start with that premise again of, like, you can't go in and just take another country, then you hear the USSR thing and say like, oh, okay, well, they're one country. Well, but there was an agreement to separate whichever land that we're supposed to have. And then there's a new talking point. It's like, okay, well, what about the violation of the agreement that was done on the American side? Like, no, the violations that took place through the agreement always happened on the Russian side. And there was no secret agreement that was supposed to reunite Ukraine, like some weird conspiratorials were saying. But any conspiracy, like, we hear that many more conspiracy theories come up from Russia than come up from, there's conspiracies that can come from every side. Like, we know that Ukraine used to be really, people argue it still is, really corrupt. We know that the U.S. is corrupt in a bunch of ways. And we know that Russia is corrupt in a bunch of ways. Now, the question is, like, do you think that U.S. and Ukraine are more corrupt than Russia? Personally, I don't. We very quickly see evidence of the lies that Russia does quicker and more frequently than I do of any other country. Like, besides China, I don't know any country that lies more than Russia. I guess North Korea does a bit, but they're just not involved so much. And a lot of the Middle Eastern dictatorships, they really even try to lie. It's like, yeah, we did it, but don't judge us with your shitty Western values. You guys let gay people get married. A lot of people, that's their idea. Like, yeah, we killed journalists, but you guys allow people to love each other. But to see what my points are, it's like listening to, okay, which propaganda you're going to listen to. A lot of that's even going to be, filtered by, like, your biases you have coming into it. So, like, all of the information is available to all of us, but I'm like, well, I'm not going to listen to the U.S. when they say that that it was just lies and propaganda from Russia, because they lie and do propaganda. But I also would have, like, I'm not going to listen. I'm saying here, I'm not going to listen to Russia when they say that there is Nazification happening, because for one, they didn't supply evidence for the Nazification. For one, they'll say the ASL Battalion and whatnot. But I've heard people's arguments for, and I was like, yeah, those guys kind of are fucking Nazis, but we're dying. So I'd rather send Nazis to frighten my front lines than, be taken over by equally xenophobic, equally racist people and lose all my rights to vote and try and make it out of your country. Like, there are so many examples. I think that's it's a more relevant one, where it's like, because it doesn't, Ukraine doesn't affect us much, but people have hard stances and don't really have much reason to. They can be influenced very simply. I guess that's gonna be it. Yeah, I guess that's all. If you like what you saw, leave a like, do a subscribe, do a crime. Just kidding, don't do a crime, and I'm out.